regarding business continuity as we work together through this challenging pandemic and state of emergency. Today's presenters are subject matter experts, the most informed, the best resources, and will be able to provide answers to your questions. I would like to thank Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Mayor Dale Holness, and all of our speakers today for taking the time to share information with us. Please, all of you, take care of yourselves and your families. To everyone attending, thank you. Thank you so much for all that you're doing in your communities, your companies, and for your employees. For example, I am proud to share that Florida Power & Light, my employer, is acutely aware of the financial constraints that we are seeing in our community due to closure of businesses, particularly non-essential businesses, and will be issuing a significant one-time decrease to our customers next month's May bill due to fuel savings that we're able to pass on to you. These are the kinds of things that we're seeing across many companies in our community. Well, we have some great presenters today, and we'll be taking questions throughout the meeting. If you do have a question, please send it to us by way of the chat button, which you will find at the bottom of your Zoom meeting screen. And we'll get to as many as we can throughout the meeting, and certainly toward the end. Again, just send us a chat and we'll take your questions there. And with that, let's get right into the meeting. I'm very pleased to call on our first speaker, who is doing an incredible job leading our county's efforts during this difficult time, Broward County Mayor Dale Holness. Mayor Holness?
Good afternoon, Juliet, and to the leadership of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance. Thank you for what you're doing to keep us moving forward. We are certainly in a situation that's very devastating for our community, both from a health standpoint, but also from an economic crisis that's now on us. The airport is operating at less than 10% of passenger load right now, with less than 5% international. Most of the flights coming in internationally are actually people repatriating back to the United States, many of our fellow folks from Broward County that might be overseas. We had a debate this week as to whether or not we should restrict flights from other parts of the country that might be undergoing some hotspots now. We had some constraints on that, in that we get a lot of funding from the FAA, and if we were to do that, it might jeopardize not just our funding, but the airlines' funding also, because they're required, if they're gonna access any of these funds from the CARES Act, that they maintain a certain load factor, or at least a number of flights going into every area that they served previously. The port is operational. As everyone knows, we were able to deal with the Zamdan and the Rotterdam issue quite effectively, with some good protocols put in place to protect the people of Broward County, and maintaining a good image of Broward County as a place that is welcoming and is hospitable. The hospitality industries, as most of you on this call know, is very important to us. 20% of our workforce work in that area, and as it is now, large number of our hotels are closed, are operating just barely. One hotelier told me that they're keeping the doors open, but they're just doing it so that they don't have too much time, difficulty in restarting or reopening. Our county administrator and our county attorney has been working diligently. We've issued quite a number of emergency orders, one to stay at home, stay in place, stay safe, restricting non-essential businesses from operating and people from going out to do business. That is helping, I believe. When I look at the chart in terms of the new cases daily, we don't see that continuing upward spike. It's looking better for the last 4 or 5 days that we don't see that big jump. So hopefully we are at a point where we're leveling off. I'm prayerful that that is the case. We opened a new testing site, Central Broward Regional, yesterday with the aid of Broward Health and the governor's office, Shane Strom and Jared Moskowitz supporting our efforts there. Transit or buses continue to operate at reduced level, Saturday schedule, and we're ensuring the safety by having passengers access the bus from the rear and no fares, so they're not interfacing with the drivers for their safety. Or social service programs continue, and we're actually seeing quite a bit of need for help there, especially through our family success centers. Most of our staff are working without interfacing with the public where they can. Many at home, about 1,500 are operating from home now. We actually ran out of computers to assign to people to take home. And we're trying to get more of that in and get more of that done. My conversation with Administrator Henry this week dealt with how we're looking going forward, because we have to be mindful of that as we go forward. And our bond had been extremely well. We had the best bond rating in the state of Florida, except for one other county and one of only 9 in the whole nation with the similar bond rating, so we can borrow money at a low cost. Now they are reviewing our status because our airport or seaport or tourism industry, which we depend on greatly, is affected. We are now cognizant of the fact that finishing or completing the expansion at the convention center and building that new airport, we got to be cautious as to where we go with that. But we continue to work on that because we already had money in place. And all our construction projects, we're keeping them alive and looking to see how we can put more money out as early as we can so that we can have the capital improvement done that will help us get back to work readily. Our Office of Small Business and Economic Development and I had teamed up today to do a webinar on how small business can navigate resources that are available. We had Ms. Althea Harris from the Small Business Administration and Ms. Sandra Narian from the Small Business Development Center on the line, along with Congressman Hastings. It was very productive, that webinar. Many people got quite a bit out of it. For more information on what we're doing economically, one can go to broward.org/econdev, and that webinar should be up on that site also, along with a list of all the lenders that are assisting our small business with the lending program available through the CARES Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Holness. You know, it's really great to have insight on the significant number of challenges the county is facing, and certainly to hear about some of the solutions reached. I have a few questions. One of them that we've gotten is there are a couple of cities in the county who have passed, I think Davie is one, who has passed a requirement or a suggestion to wear masks as protective covering. And as this is, we've heard there's some cities in Miami-Dade as well. We're all just wondering, has the county contemplated doing anything similar? Where are you on that?
Language is being drafted right now by the county attorney. I spoke with county administrator last night, probably about 7 o'clock we left here, to see how we can put that in place. Here's a challenge that we have with that, and we want to do it, but today we still have a shortage of masks. And if we're requiring people to do it, then how do you penalize them when they can't access it? That's a question that we would have. The language that we draft may be more urgent rather than saying you must, because if we say you must, then penalties go in place and you're not able to do it. So that is being contemplated as I speak to you now. The drafts are being looked at.
That's really great. Great to hear. I know that even getting into grocery stores and so that's being required. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about, we're approaching Easter and churches, you know, there's a question of we're going to expect that people will be attending churches. What is the county seeing on that, and will there be any order or kind of requirement that people stay home?
So the order that we have in place that asks folks to shelter at home and be safer at home still applies. However, the language doesn't prohibit church gathering. We are asking that our churches adhere to the CDC guidelines that says no more than 10 people and spaced out 6 feet apart. Most of our churches have gone to streaming. I actually had a conversation about an hour ago with one of our pastors wanting to know if he can do a parking lot where the cars can be in the parking lot and they can be 6 feet apart. Or orders didn't prohibits religious services. So they can, but again, the suggestion is no more than 10 people is our suggestion, and 6 feet apart, practice social distancing so we can stop the spread of this deadly disease.
Well, thank you, Mayor. This is certainly going to be a very different Easter for many of us, and thank you for your guidance on that.
Thank you.
Next, we are going to turn to our someone who knows a lot about how COVID is affecting our economy, our community, and our businesses as much as anyone in the state of Florida. He is the chief economist for the Florida Chamber of Commerce, and we're so glad he's with us here today. And that is Dr. Jerry Parrish. Dr. Parrish, I invite you to make your presentation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you letting me join you today. I've got a couple of slides I want to show you and a couple of maps just to let you know what we know at the Florida Chamber and the Chamber Foundation. First of all, if you're not getting our daily emails, you can get them. We have a website we've listed as Follow Facts, Not Fear. And you can find that at the floridachamber.com/coronavirus. And it's got a lot of info, some of which I'm going to show you right here. Every day I do a series of maps that we can put on our website. This is what the daily map that went out this morning looks like. And it shows the number of cases, number of people tested. You can see the number of deaths there and everything. So you can check and see how your county is doing. And the Department of Health updates this every night by 7 p.m. and we're able to show that. But what's interesting about this is I can also show you where we were just a few days ago. Take a look at the map here. Now I want to show you back during March 20th. That's just literally had been 19 days ago. And you can see the difference. Just in Broward County, we went from 128 cases to 2,365 in only 19 days. We've almost filled the map now. Only Liberty County is the only county in Florida that doesn't have an active case. What's really important here, though, is the density of these cases. And so I've done maps, and I'm going to show you one here in a second, that shows you the number of people per positive COVID case. That'll give you a sense of where the majority of cases are. And it probably won't surprise you that, that Broward is number 2. Miami-Dade has the most cases per capita. Broward's number 2, 826 people for every 1 confirmed case. Now that's pretty high in the state of Florida, but I do want to show you, talk to you a little bit about, what that is, how that is compared to some of the worst places in the U.S. One of the things I looked at was New York City, and instead of 1 out of every 826 people having a positive case, in New York City it's about 105 now. So the density in New York City, which obviously is one of the worst places in the country, is more than 7.8 times what it is in Broward. So, I think it's important to remember a couple things here. New York City is ahead of us on the curve. You're gonna see some really horrible stories out of there this next few days. What it looks like is they will peak here pretty quickly. But Florida's not going to peak for a little while. We're on the way up as far as number of cases, and certainly we expect those to grow. What's great about the Florida cases is, though, we're typically running about 10 to 11% of the people that are tested are positive. It's not a super high number when you look at places like New Orleans, New York, and some of those places. So keep it in mind. Certainly, it's going to affect our economy having, this many cases in Florida. As you all know, you probably won't be surprised. What you may have not seen this morning is our initial unemployment claims came out for the state of Florida. In America, we had 6.6 million. We actually had a smaller number at 169,885 in Florida compared to last week's number. So what that means is over the past 3 weeks, when normally we would have this time of the year about 6 or 7, maybe 8,000 cases during this same time frame, we've had 472,682 initial unemployment claims. And we know that this is not the peak of it. This is not the worst. I know there's been a lot of extra capacity added to our Department of Economic Opportunity. They, like every other state in Florida, was caught off guard with the raw numbers of people that were filing unemployment claims. However, they've added a new app. They've added 72 new servers to accept the volume. So what I think is we're going to continue to see cases probably next week, which will, the claims this week will be reported next Thursday. That's going to be, really when we see a big number. So they're still coming, almost 500,000 now, and certainly more coming. How's that going to affect the state of Florida and counties? I've told people to kind of take a look at the percentage of leisure and hospitality jobs as a percent of private sector jobs as a proxy, of which counties are going to get hurt the worst. Fortunately for Broward, y'all are at the U.S. average. You're below the Florida average in this metric. So although things are going to be very difficult for Broward, don't let me think it's, don't think it's not, you're probably going to get hit at the average of what the U.S. is. Now, the reason I use leisure and hospitality jobs is, we knew that, that's going to be a proxy because those would be hit earliest. When we got the U.S. numbers of job losses, here's how they came out. Now, remember, these are for March, and this is during the period of March the 8th through the 14th. So pretty early in the game, we already had 701,000 jobs lost in the U.S., and 65.5% of them were leisure and hospitality. Now, I will tell you about 91% of those were restaurants. Only 9% were hotels. That will change. There'll be a lot, higher percentage in the hotels in the coming weeks. Healthcare and social assistance, you may think they're hiring a lot of people. Well, they are in the hospitals, but they're not. That's dentist's office, some doctor's office laying off people. Professional business services, 50,000 of those 52,000 were temporary agency layoffs, layoffs from them. Retail, it's been clothing, it's been furniture. However, general merchandise like Walmart and Target are actually hiring people, and you'll see more of that when the numbers come out for Florida. Construction's a little bit everything, other services, manufacturing, smaller percentage, but certainly all of those jobs are important to the state of Florida. What I think you're going to see here over the next few weeks is we'll get Florida's job numbers on April the 17th. Those will be for March and during this same time frame, because when we count jobs in the U.S., we always count them on the week that the 12th of the month falls. So if you'll sign up for our weekly emails at the Florida Chamber, you'll be able to get these job numbers as soon as they come out for Florida. We'll be posting them on the daily emails, and we'll be able to give you a lot more details about what's happening to our state. The tax revenue we're going to lose, the amount of jobs, we'll have an estimate of that. But remember, these numbers are continuing to climb. There's going to be continuing economic damage. I'd love to give you some great news right now, but certainly it's going to be a tough month for Florida. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Parrish. I never thought I would appreciate hearing that Broward is average in something, but I'm glad that we're average in the area of hospitality in terms of employment jobs. At least that keeps us on the down curve here. All right, so we have a few questions. And one of the first is that based on your revised economic recession model, what is the expected job loss in the upcoming 6 months to a year in Broward, at least based on your initial forecast?
That's a really good question, and I can't answer that. It's too early to do those county level forecasts. Honestly, right now I'm working on the state level forecast for jobs and the state level forecast for lost revenue. One of the things you look at is Florida runs on sales taxes. 77% of Florida's general revenue comes from sales and use taxes. Well, $4 billion of that comes from automobile sales. That's a big chunk of what we got. And I don't see a lot of people standing around the dealerships buying cars right now. So we know our general revenue is going to get hurt. There's also local option sales tax involved in that as well. And so all the counties in the state of Florida are going to be hit. But right now I'm working at the state level. I'll get out the county level forecast just as soon as I can, but it's still too early for that.
I can certainly appreciate that. This has been a very dynamic scenario and numbers changing daily. So another question that we had here is it still too early to estimate or predict how long this recession will last in Florida?
Yeah, it is. I'm working on that as well. Matter of fact, the Florida Chamber Foundation is working very closely with McKinsey, the global consulting firm, and we're together every day and multiple times a day. We're working on not just the estimates, but a recovery plan for the state of Florida that we expect to hand the governor and the legislature when we're done with it, as far as, here's what is, here's what's happening, here's what's expected to happen in the next few months, and here's how Florida has to go about recovering. We're dependent on a couple things here. One is if some of these medicines that we already have are able to be applied to COVID-19, then we're ahead of the game. And we know it's going to be a while before there's a vaccination. Certainly people tell me, into next year and maybe late into next year, those will be game changers. Right now, really what we need to do is get through this peak. And there's different estimates on when the peak is coming in Florida, and there's estimates all over the map. So we have to get through that first, but we are working on the recovery plan at the Florida Chamber Foundation.
Well, heartening to know that you're working on it. And as we always say, I think we are the only state chamber that has its very own resident economist. So we're very fortunate for that. Thank you, Dr. Parrish. Before we move on, inquiring minds want to know, are we going to be able to get these slides that you presented? Is that something
sure.
you can share?
I will be glad. I'll send them to you right now while I'm on the call.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Next, we would like to move on to talk a little bit about healthcare. Of course, that's top of mind for all of us. Safety in the hospital systems. We invite Dr. Joshua Lenchus. He's the Regional Medical Officer of Broward Health. Dr. Lenchus.
Thank you very much to the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance for allowing Broward Health to participate once more. And thank you to the mayor and to Congresswoman Schultz for being on the call as well. I wanted to expand a little bit on Dr. Parrish's numbers. In the state of Florida, we have tested nearly 153,000 citizens. More than 16,000 of those have been positive for a 10.7% positive rate. That's 136,000 people that are in fact negative. Within the state of Florida, of those 16,000 or so that are positive, there's been a little more than 2,100 hospitalizations, and already 354 Floridians have died. If we drill down to Broward County, we've tested 20,732 people, of which 18,260 are negative, 2,454 as of this morning are positive. We're a little bit higher than the rest of the state. As was mentioned, Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties account for about 60% of the total cases in the state of Florida. Our county positive rate is 11.8%. Of the 2,400 or so patients that are positive, 339 have been hospitalized and 66 have died. What we have prepared for in healthcare is really, this has been, the word unprecedented is has been used an unprecedented number of times in describing this pandemic. But I will tell you that what is entirely heartening, a silver lining, if you will, in this gray cloud, is the fact that across the world, medical professionals have really banded together. Politics and geography aside, we speak to our counterparts in countries like Italy and Spain that are really way downstream from where we are, and then closer to home, folks in places like New York City and Chicago and Detroit that are really suffering the brunt of this, in an effort to prevent us from suffering the same fate, so that we can learn something from what other people are really trying to address. And thankfully, I think in the state and locally, we've implemented personal protective equipment conservation measures in anticipation of this surge that may come, and as well as really preparing our hospitals, not just Broward Health, but other hospitals around the community and around the state for what could happen in the event that we start to follow a curve like New York City. So I feel very fortunate working alongside these folks who are on the front lines on a daily basis, and really putting their health and safety. Our job is to put their health and safety first and foremost in our minds, and their job is really to continue to provide the stellar medical care that we've been able to provide here to our community.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lenchus, for what you're doing, your colleagues at Broward Health, and of course, all the healthcare workers there and everywhere. You're so critical at this time, and it's really comforting to know that you are working around the clock to take care of our community. I know that Broward Health has been involved in doing some of the testing, as you mentioned. Do you know if there's any plans to do any more drive-through testing sites in the county? And if so, when do we expect that to happen?
So as Mayor Holness elaborated to earlier yesterday, we stood up in conjunction with the state and the county, the Central Broward Park testing facility that's located on 441 and Sunrise Boulevard. The address for that is 3700 Northwest 11th Place. Walk-ups are not allowed. There is a process that we follow in an effort to get folks to be tested out there. That's for community testing. Our testing site is one of 3 that I'm aware of in the county. The other 2, one is run by the Cleveland Clinic out in the Weston area. The other one is run by Memorial West out in the C.B. Smith Park area. So those are 3 testing sites that I'm aware of in Broward County. Certainly those residents that are reside in the southern part of the county, the Hard Rock Casino is also running a testing facility there in the North Miami area.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And continuing on the theme of testing, has there been any more information, or can you comment at all on the antibody testing? There's been a lot of discussion about really trying to find out what portion of the population has in fact been infected, but kind of gone beyond.
So that's a sort of a loaded question. It has a couple of parts to it. I appreciate that. There are a number of tests that are out on the market that we can use to assess one's COVID-19 status. In fact, the FDA has they've done a Herculean effort in really fast tracking a lot of vendors through getting their tests on the market through an emergency use authorization authority that the FDA has, which effectively says, listen, we looked at your preliminary data. It looks pretty good. It's going to take us a long time as the FDA to go through this and really validate it. You want to put it out there. This is a national emergency. You put it out there. They've authorized states with the responsibility if they want to take up the testing for that. So there's more than 24 different tests that are out there. The tests are really broken down into sort of 2 buckets. One is a PCR test, which is a polymerase chain reaction test. This really looks for the RNA, the real code within the virus, and this will tell whether in fact someone is infected or not. The other tests that are out there fall into a bucket, like you mentioned, the antibody test. When we get infected with when we get infected with something, the body mounts an immune response to the extent that it can, and the initial antibodies that it mounts come in two flavors, if you will. One is called IgM, and one is called IgG. And the IgM is sort of the early pawns, if you will, that get dispatched to fight the infection early on, and then reinforcements come in the wave of IgG. These antibody tests are very good to be used, but it really depends on where in that immune response the patient is in order to see whether in fact that those pawns have already been dispatched or whether we're in that second wave of antibody. So if you look at the data from some of those antibody tests, they're very helpful when you look at, now there's talk about convalescent serum, patients that have been infected, who have overcome the infection and are now doing well, they're symptom free. Can they donate their plasma, and can we use their plasma, which is antibody rich, and then infuse that into somebody that may be in dire straits? Again, the FDA has allowed that as an experimental therapy. We're looking at that in the South Florida area. There's a company called One Blood that's really a compilation of a group of different blood conservation and collection agencies that's looking at that. We were on the phone with them and the governor this past Sunday. There's a lot of unknown there, but it certainly holds promise from a theoretical and scientific method. So I think the test, I wouldn't hedge all my bets just on the antibody test. I think the antibody test is of a group of tests that we have available to us to really identify patients that may be infected. And I'll just close on that question by saying, you know, obviously as the number of people go through testing, I would expect that the number of cases that we have to increase. But I think that the consolation prize, if you will, is the fact that when we look at the number of people that are positive and we look at the number of people that are actually hospitalized, it's a minority of people that actually require hospitalization, which is beneficial, right? So you could have 80% of the people that are infected that are still able to recuperate and convalesce at home, and they should be encouraged to do so through that quarantine and isolation process, rather than overloading the hospital system. We're here, we're open 24/7, 365 days for those patients that require that kind of urgent medical care. But just because you're positive does not mean that you need to seek medical attention at your local hospital.
Thank you, Dr. Lenchus. That was extremely helpful. And I know most of us have been hearing about these various tests, but that really clarified it for us. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
All right. At this time, we're going to move on to our next speaker. And she is going to be very helpful in us to talk about business loan programs available to businesses, and in particular, the Paycheck Protection Program. Our next guest is Sandra Mayor, Senior Vice President, Corporate Institutional Banking for PNC Bank. Sandra?
Hi, good afternoon, Juliet and everybody. Thank you so much for including me today. And after listening to Dr. Lenchus, we are feeling for those folks in our community and in the state that have been impacted. As most of you know, the CARES Act was enacted and it had two components. Both of them are to help employers. Today, I want to focus on the payroll portion, which is called Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP. There is another portion which you can access directly from the SBA website, and that's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, or EIDL. But we focus on that one because as a banker, we are charged with disseminating information, the funds that are available under PPP. So I just want to talk high level about it to give you a real good understanding of the program. The purpose really is to continue to provide for employers to pay salaries, benefits for their workforce, along with eligible expenses. So sometimes people say, well, why not just let them go on unemployment? Well, unemployment benefits do not include health care. So this was designed both to keep employers, to allow them to keep trusted employees so that they wouldn't go on unemployment, and also to pay some other eligible expenses. I'll go into both of those and how it's calculated. But the biggest questions I receive are, what is eligible? The second question is, what is forgivable? Because unlike other 7A SBA programs, this program does not require collateral. It does not require personal guarantees. So under the idea of what is eligible, if you think about it this way, it is expenses that would be inclusive of wages, paid time off, vacation, any other benefits that the employer currently provided, along with state and local taxes that the employer paid for that compensation. So it's really a great program because in addition to looking at the annual of payroll for 2019, you are able as an employer to include those benefits that you paid for your employees. And then what you will do is you'll take an average of those 12 months from 2019. So that average monthly payroll will then get to be multiplied by 2.5. That's in consideration of the fact that from the time an employer receives the money from the government through the banks, you will have 8 weeks of payroll, because obviously you're getting 2.5 times the eligible monthly average payroll as determined by 2019 payroll. And some of the documents that you'll be providing include the IRS 2019 quarterly 940s, 941s, or 944s, whichever is applicable for your business. So the banks will have to get those reports. In addition, if there are outside expenses that are not included in those reports, as I mentioned before, other benefits that you've paid for your employees, you can submit those as well. So that will go into the calculation. And then you are then, once you receive the money, the onus on the employer is to make sure that you do not lay anyone off. If you have furloughed employees before getting these funds, because some people have had to do that, you must bring those employees back onto payroll or attempt to do so before June 30th of this year. Now, again, you're making an average, you're doing the best assessment that you can of your payroll needs for the next 8 weeks upon receipt of the funds. You have no control if someone doesn't come back to your employment. But again, that money is to be used specifically for payroll. So in using round numbers, if you receive, say, $100,000, so that average payroll for 2019 times 2.5 for round numbers ended up being $100,000. Think about it this way, 75% or 75,000 of that 100 is required to be used for payroll expenses. So you ask, what is the rest used for? You may, as an employer, include in the loan amount that extra money that you're given in addition to the 2 months of payroll. You are allowed to pay some other eligible expenses. And think about it this way, they include sort of the expenses you'll need to quote unquote keep the lights on and the doors open. So you may use that extra money for interest expense on a mortgage or rent payments for your location. You can also use it for utilities. So again, it's to allow you to, in essence, keep the doors open even when everyone is maybe working from home. So again, the highlights of this is when you receive the money, you must use at least 75% of it for eligible employee payroll and benefits. At the end of the 8 weeks, the reason why you must go to a bank and that the banks are being charged, both with putting the money out there and also with verifying the forgivable portion of these loans, is that we have then at the end of the 8 weeks, a little bit before, probably at the 7th week, we will have to ascertain that you have used the funds for the purpose intended. Let's just say that at the end of that 8 weeks, you have used all of the funds. Everybody's great. The sky is blue again. We're all back at work. Perfect. You have no further liability. You will get that money forgivable by the SBA. Now, let's say that you had extra funds. You had an extra $50,000 that for whatever reason was not utilized for the purpose intended, which we've already gone over. At that point, you will have an option of returning the funds to the bank, which then we will pay off your debt to the SBA, or you may keep those monies, whatever's left over, for a 2-year loan at 1%. Further, you will have that money with a deferred interest period of 6 months from the time you decide to take the loan. So again, 8 weeks is the length of the program. You will have 2.5 times your average monthly payroll as of 2019, and you have to use that money to keep those employees that you had on the payroll. And this is a further little caveat that they just inserted. We have to get evidence of February payroll to ascertain that the business was still viable and that the business still had employees. So I know that's an awful lot to put out there. It is really, it's an easy program, but a complicated program. There are some other caveats as it relates to industry. For instance, your general SBA small business are judged as businesses with 500 employees or less. There is an industry in hospitality, hotels, hospitality, in which you're able to have more than 500, but that's going to be viewed and evaluated by the lender who is, your lender who is going to be responsible for making sure that you're eligible. So apologies for the long-winded answer, but I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. And no apologies, that was extremely comprehensive, and you did in fact anticipate most of the questions that were asked. Very thorough and really helpful in determining eligibility. I'm going to actually pause on some follow-up questions that we did have for you because we just had join us our Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is time constrained. And so we will get back with you, but thank you so much. We are very fortunate to have Congresswoman with us today, who is a powerhouse for us in DC. She does a great job representing South Florida, and I'd venture to say the country in the U.S. House of Representatives. With that, Congresswoman, please do join us.
Thank you so much, Juliet, and to Bob as well. Thank you for having me and for really creating this forum so that we can stay connected while we actually can't be connected in person. I was hoping to be able to be with you last week, but I had a family emergency, and so thank you for your understanding. And I'm really going to just spend a few minutes going over some overlap with what you just heard from Sandra, but I'm going to cover more the policy angle rather than the nitty gritty. However, I will commend you to go to my Facebook page, because I did have an opportunity the other day on Monday to interview Victoria Guerrera, who is the administrator for the SBA for South Florida. And we spent about 30 minutes with me asking her some of the most frequently asked questions about qualification for these programs and how the SBA is going to be treating those. So if you want to spend a very informative half hour that will get deep in the weeds on this stuff, then we have that interview posted on my Facebook page. So with that, obviously, I just really feel so fortunate to have the relationship that I do with the Greater Fort Lauderdale Business Alliance, and it's just so important that we make sure that we have a community-wide backbone that helps connect our businesses, and that's what this organization does. We have 28 million small businesses in the United States. 50% of our workforce in the US in the private sector works for a small business. And so in these extremely difficult times, it is just absolutely critical that we stay connected, because we can't be connected in person, then making sure that we can communicate to our small business owners throw them as many lifelines as we can possibly throw, and also over communicate. Sometimes we worry that maybe we're just telling people things they already know. Right now, I don't think that we can communicate too much. I don't think that's possible. Our stay-at-home policies are so critical. Every time I have a chance to get on a forum virtually with people, I want to just remind you that this is not a drill, that we are not out of the woods, that in spite of New York possibly plateauing and seeing a flattening of their curve, we have not seen that here in Florida, and we may not see it as soon as we'd like. So we just have to keep that in mind and really heed the guidance that we should treat as almost as if it's mandatory. I just told my daughters that no, we can't go pick up. One of you can't go pick up a body wash that you need until we need some other things, because you have to limit the number of times that we go out and interact with other people with whom we don't need to. We need to limit that as much as possible. So just by way of personal example, thankfully they understood. But I just want to make sure that we're continuing to use extreme caution. We have an especially disproportionate number of seniors in our state and in our community, and they are especially vulnerable. And now we've even seen that definition of who is vulnerable is even more broad. So we just have to make sure that we're continuing to be mindful of that. So we've already passed 3 pieces of legislation in Congress that were designed to respond to the crisis. Each bill included substantial aid provisions to help workers and small businesses. The first emergency supplemental, which seems like so long ago, but it was just about 3 weeks ago, gave small businesses in states like Florida, where we have an emergency disaster declaration that's already been declared, an opportunity to apply for what Sandra mentioned, the low interest economic injury disaster loans. And those can be used to cover payroll, bills and debt that cannot be paid as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. Our second bill dramatically expanded workers' access to job protected leave, whether to quarantine from exposure due to the virus, or to take care of an exposed family member, or to take care of children if their childcare or their school closed, which is now nearly everybody. And so that 14-day paid sick leave was provided in that piece of legislation, whether or not an individual is covered already by sick leave, and then also up to 3 months of paid family leave that is coronavirus related. And that cost will initially be borne by employers, but it will be fully reimbursable by the federal government. The third bill, the CARES Act, which is what we've had the most questions about, and was the bill that we passed just about 2 weeks ago now, and we've had quite a few questions. That third bill is the largest stimulus package in history, $2 trillion really of rocket fuel designed to make sure that we can get an injection of resources into the economy and make sure that we can try to weave a safety net more tightly so that we don't have people and businesses fall through it. And we know that likely will happen, and we're trying to just weave that safety net as tight as possible right now. So that legislation was obviously a bipartisan compromise, the result of difficult negotiations. I was proud to cast my vote in favor of it, or rather with not have to cast a voice vote, but I did have to fly to Washington to make sure that we could be available for quorum. That was unfortunate, but that's a story for another day. That bill, the CARES Act, had $377 billion that will go to small businesses, $560 billion to individuals, and $500 billion to larger businesses. $340 billion will go to state and local governments. $154 billion will go directly to healthcare workers fighting the public health crisis. $44 billion will go to education and other provisions, and $26 billion to major food security programs. And I know you're all interested in the portion that focuses on supporting small business, so I want to drill down on that a little bit. Of the $377 billion for small businesses, $350 billion created the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, and Sandra dove into that a little bit. That's a zero-fee loan program that includes loan forgiveness. If a business retains their employees, it's very important that we stress that you have to retain your employees to be eligible for this, and you have to follow certain other requirements during the term of the loan. and it is a loan that is forgiven if you follow those rules, and it is for an 8-week period, and its design policy-wise is to be a bridge so that you can make sure that you can hold on to your employees, not have to let them go. And you also can couple it with the the economic injury disaster loan, as well as the economic injury disaster advance payment, which is a $10,000 grant that you can use while you're waiting for your EIDL loan to be processed. Now, the rollout of the Paycheck Protection Program has not been very smooth, unfortunately. It was meant to open this past Friday. Many banks announced that they weren't ready to start accepting applications. Other banks, particularly the larger ones, began requiring a prior customer relationship, which is not in the legislation, was not intended to be an obstacle, and was an inappropriate obstacle thrown in the path of small businesses that need that help. So we're going to be working on addressing that. I realize there might be some employees of some of the larger banks that impose that policy. I also realize that the Bank Secrecy Act and a number of other Patriot Act provisions are in place, and it's easier to process an application for an existing customer. But we have a lot of folks who are left twisting in the wind when that is the policy that's adopted. So we know that people have had difficulties because of those issues. I share your frustration, and we're working in the next package to address some of those obstacles. So we'll continue to push to make sure that the banks the process for processing small businesses loan applications is easier. If you're looking to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program, I encourage you to visit the SBA's lender matching portal. That's sba.gov/paycheck protection/find. And another important new program from the CARES Act is the Emergency Injury Disaster Advance. That program applies to those, as I said, seeking an emergency injury disaster loan who need immediate support. It's a up to a $10,000 grant, and that's a quick infusion of cash to help a company stay above water while you're waiting for that loan to be processed. You can, unlike normally, you can apply for both of these programs and any other existing SBA program, and there is nothing that precludes you or requires you to choose one over the other. So these are really good programs on paper. They have to actually get the resources out to folks, and so they're only as good as the implementation process. And so we're going to continue to work to fine-tune those and work with SBA to do that as well. If you have more questions, again, please go to my Facebook page. That interview will help you a lot. Just want to touch base on the unemployment compensation insurance program, because obviously our workers and families are struggling mightily. We secured an additional 13 weeks of unemployment compensation insurance. In Florida, we only have 12 weeks, and we have, unfortunately, the stingiest unemployment insurance program in the country. Only about $254 a week is available to most employees at max. And so we added a pandemic unemployment payment with an additional 13 weeks to the unemployment compensation insurance program, and it's accessible through every state's portal. Our state is having very well-publicized challenges with access to our portal. It was not well designed, and it is now needing to utilize paper applications, which have been difficult to access. So I know I've been getting endless calls from constituents who have been very frustrated by not being able to access those. But these we added a $600 pandemic unemployment insurance payment throughout the duration of your initial weeks of state unemployment insurance, and then an additional 13 weeks. So that's going to help go a long way once we get it, untangled here in Florida, to help a lot of people, and that's really important. Then lastly, I'll touch on the direct payments, Juliet, and then I'm happy to take questions. We provided direct rebates to Americans who make less than $75,000, couples that make less than $150,000 combined, and there's a $500 rebate per dependent child. It starts to phase out when you go from $75,000 to $99,000 in annual income. And then after $99,000, you're not eligible and won't be receiving that payment. And the same with a couple at $198,000. If you file the 2018 or 2019 tax return, you won't have to do anything. The IRS will have the deposit information for you and most likely will just deposit it right into your account that they have on file. We were able, thankfully, to stop the original plan by the Treasury and the IRS to require Social Security beneficiaries and individuals who don't file to file a simple tax return, and now they won't have to do that. They will also get either a check, or if they want to provide account information, it'll be deposited as well. The first round of payments are expected to be made really starting next week, mid-April, and then the second round of payments will be made to Social Security beneficiaries who did not file tax returns in 2018 or 2019, and they'll get those benefits, like I said, by direct deposit most likely. The IRS plans to start sending out paper checks in the first week in May, and those checks will be issued in adjusted gross income order. So that way we get that money to the people who make the least first. So they'll be issued at a rate that Treasury is telling us at about $5 million per week, but that means it could take up to 20 weeks to issue all of those checks. So it's not going to be a quick and prompt process. So I want to end by just saying that we don't expect this to be the last stimulus package that we pass. We're already working on a fourth COVID-19 stimulus response package. As you probably saw in the news today, the Senate attempted to just infuse additional resources into the existing programs. We've already identified that there are numerous problems and limitations because in terms of who's eligible for some of these programs. We're getting inundated with those calls as well. So this was, and I don't want to be partisan, I'm just going to be factual, but this is a tussle between Democrats and Republicans, where Democrats believe that if we're going to pass another piece of legislation, it's very difficult for us to do that right now. We obviously all can't be there in person. It requires unanimous consent. So if we're going to be able to pass something that on unanimous consent, that means there's no controversy or very little. And we need to make sure we address some of these glaring problems so we get more resources to more people. So simply just, the issue here, just so you hear it from, one of the horse's mouths, is it's not a simple matter of just putting more money. We do need to make more money available because paycheck protection, for example, is available only on a first come, first served basis. And it's $350 billion that's available. And the most well-organized, larger, small businesses are going to be first in line. And then the smaller ones will get shut out pretty quickly. So, but we've got to also make sure we address some of the problems that have cropped up and some of the things that we didn't get included in the third package. So with that, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you. My congressional office obviously is my employees are all teleworking, but I do want to give you my district office phone number. We're picking up the messages and getting back to people. And of course, you can always email us. If you Google Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the first thing that comes up is my congressional website. And then my district office phone number is 954-845-1179. And Juliet, thank you so much. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman.
Sure.
And we are running toward the end of our time, but as the Congresswoman mentioned, and we all know, her website is always chock full of information, and her office is always available to us and her constituents. So please take advantage of that. We really appreciate your being here today.
My pleasure.
And now to
Thank
close,
you so much.
Absolutely. And now to close, I'd like to call on President and CEO of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance, Bob Swindell. Bob?
It's great to have a leader like you that's got tremendous experience and a calm and thoughtful demeanor. I think you bring a lot of reassurance to the folks on the call today, and it's a pleasure working with you. We're really thankful to the Alliance for the overwhelming support we're receiving from the business community and our members. When times get tough, folks really do pull together in Broward County, and I'm very proud of how our community has responded. We're also working closely with our counterparts in Miami-Dade and Palm Beach at the Beacon Council and the Business Development Board. Our great relationship with them over the years just continues to strengthen, and we're working on programs like BizHelp South Florida, which will be a dedicated website for South Florida businesses as we exit out of this crisis and get into recovery mode. Our priority, of course, is to preserve the jobs and preserve the businesses in South Florida, and working together, we're able to do that. We've also had great partnerships with both the Florida Chamber. I really appreciate Jerry Parrish being on the call today, and also the Federal Reserve. We're working with both the Federal Reserve branch in Miami and the Federal Reserve in Atlanta. They're very interested in what's happening to Broward County businesses. We've had a long-standing relationship with them, and we're working together. I also want to let folks know that while these calls are important and we put a lot of effort in putting them together, we do have business as usual going on as well. The Alliance is still at full capacity. I'm in regular conversations with our county administrator and city managers. I was literally just in the county administrator's office. Broward folks will be happy to know that projects are still being worked. David Coddington, our business development team, continues to actively work projects. A lot of our real estate folks work remotely anyway, and projects that we had in the pipeline are continuing. But these opportunities represent hundreds of new jobs for Broward County and a significant capital investment. And our county administrator and her team, while they have a lot on their plates, they haven't forgotten about our core mission at the Alliance, and that's new jobs and new investment in Broward County. And I will tell you, there is still significant interest in Broward County. Our county commission has been equally accessible, and I can't thank Mayor Holness enough. Your professionalism during this whole crisis has just been phenomenal, and you all have a steady hand at the helm, and you've been great to work with, and we really appreciate how you've made yourself accessible to not only the Alliance but to our businesses. We had a great call yesterday with our executive committee, and Mayor Holness is one of our executive committee members. So again, thank you very much, Mayor Holness. As we wrap up, I just want folks to keep in mind that our tagline, work in the cloud, live in the sun, has never been stronger or more important in our branding. It's a situation like this, it really makes people begin to think about where they live and how they work. And we think that the brand for Greater Fort Lauderdale and Broward County continues to grow stronger and stronger. And I'm getting requests currently about companies that are looking from the financial services industry that have looked at South Florida in the past, so they're more interested than ever about a potential location in South Florida. So I think this is going to be while it's been a dramatic impact on our economy, I'm expecting a pretty strong recovery as we exit the other side of this. And please reinforce that with your employees. People that had great jobs 3 or 4 weeks ago want to come back to those great jobs. So our priority at the Alliance and Broward County government is to preserve our businesses and make sure that people have great jobs to come back to. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.